The truth is simple. There are no truly useless items in Lies of P, only misunderstood ones. The items I ignored or dismissed as pointless often became some of the most powerful tools in the game, when I've understood when and how to use them. And ironically, the things that feel weak at first are often the ones that break boss fights wide open. When you are playing Lies of P, you are picking up items constantly. Ampoules, throwables, weird consumables that pile up in your inventory. I personally didn't use even half of that list on initial walkthrough. I saved them, thinking they must be important, only to finish the game and realize they didn't matter at all. So what's going on here? Are these items actually useless, or are we just using them wrong? After spending dozens of hours in Lies of P, my answer is next. The useless items aren't weak, they're situational. And that's exactly why the most players, including me at the start, misunderstand them. One of the biggest examples of this for me was the short put. On the first playthrough I completely ignored it. I picked up a few early, looked at the damage and thought, why should I even use this instead of just hitting the boss? So I did what most players do, I saved them. By the time I finished the game I had a pile of them unused, and honestly I assumed they were just another filler item. Then came the New Game Plus playthrough. Bosses started hitting harder, fights lasted longer, and suddenly I needed anything that could give me an edge, especially in high-pressure fights like Lexasia or the Nameless Puppet. That is when I finally tried the short put properly, and it completely changed the fight. Not because it does insane damage, but because it can help to stagger enemies efficiently. And once I realized that, it went from "why should I use this?" to never entering a tough boss fight without it further on. That is when it clicked for me. The problem wasn't the short put item itself, it was how I was juggling it. I juggled items in Lies of P by a simple question: does this help me kill things faster? If the answer is no, the item gets ignored. That's exactly why so many consumables, especially things like ground-based traps or niche throwables, get labeled as useless. I remember thinking like, why should I ever use this instead of just attacking? And honestly, that mindset is a problem, because these items were never meant to replace your weapon. They are not designed to be your main source of damage. They exist to control space, create breathing room, or manipulate enemy behavior. But if you try to use them like a sword or a direct damage tool, of course they will feel weak. That's where the disconnect happens. You can see it clearly when comparing different player approaches. Some people go through entire playthroughs barely touching consumables, convinced they're pointless. Others rely on them heavily, and suddenly bosses become manageable, even trivial. Same items, completely different results. Because the difference isn't the item, it's the intent behind using it. And once you stop thinking this should deal damage and start thinking this should give me an advantage, everything changes. There is a very specific habit that quietly ruins how people experience consumables in Lies of P – saving them. I've done it. You've probably done it too. You pick up something that looks valuable, assume it's rare or powerful, and think, I will use this later, when I really need it. And that moment never comes. You reach the end of the game with a full inventory of untouched items and a weird realization. They didn't help you, because you never gave them the chance to. This mindset creates an illusion that items are useless, when in reality, they were just never tested. That disappointment doesn't come from the item itself, it comes from the expectations. Because when you delay using something, you build it up in your head, and when it doesn't match the imagined power level, it feels underwhelming, even if it's actually useful in the right context. The truth is, Lies of P quietly encourages experimentation. Items are more available than they seem, and the game rarely punishes you for using them early. But psychologically we treat them like limited resources. And that is what turns useful tool into useless clutter. At some moment I've understood that throwables can carry entire boss fights. You can literally beat the game just using them. Lies of P isn't built around pure melee combat. It gives you ranged options, status effects, utility tools, all designed to give you flexibility. So when someone leans into that system, it doesn't mean they're breaking the game. It means they're playing it differently. The real tension comes from expectation. My first walkthrough was to approach the game like a traditional Souls experience, focused on timing, positioning and close combat. But later, on next journeys, I saw consumables as part of the core design, just another layer of strategy. Neither approach is wrong in the end, but it explains why the same item can feel either completely useless or incredibly strong. And once I realized that, the whole idea of useless items starts to fall apart, because the value of an item isn't fixed. It depends entirely on how you choose to engage with the Lies of P game. I also believe that some items felt useless to me at first because the game never clearly showed up their purpose. Not directly, at least. I've picked something up, read a short description, maybe tested once, and if it doesn't immediately click, you move on. There is no tutorial saying, use this when you are being chased, or this works best against aggressive enemies. So, if your first experience with an item is awkward or ineffective, that becomes your lasting impression. And first impression matters a lot in a game like this. Take situational items, for example. When you're under pressure, low on stamina, or just panicking, they will feel clunky and pointless. But that doesn't mean they are. It just means the Lies of P expects you to figure out the context yourself. And that is not always intuitive. Because, let's be honest, most of us don't experiment mid-fight. When a boss is aggressive, we default to what we trust – dodging, blocking, attacking. We don't think, maybe it is the perfect time to try this weird consumable I've never used. So the item never gets a fair chance. And over time it gets labeled as useless. Not because it is, but because it never fit into our existing habits. So are there useless items in Lies of P? Not really. What they are? The items that don't fit the way most of us instinctively play. Items that require shift in mindset. Items that reward experimentation. Items that feel weak, until in some circumstances they don't. And maybe that is the real design choice here, because Lies of P just gives you the option. You can ignore consumables entirely and still succeed, or you can lean into them and completely change how the game feels. But if something seems useless, it's definitely worth asking. Is it actually weak, or have I just never tried it the right way? Thanks for watching, hit that like button and subscribe for more Lies of P and other Souls-like video games, guides, lore videos, and stay sharp out there.